Good evening, dear listeners. Welcome back to The Curious Case. I'm Davis, your host for tonight's tale, and I'm so glad you've joined me. Where are you listening from this evening? Tell me in the comments. I always love seeing how far our little village stories travel. So, pour your tea, settle your heart, and lean closer. Because tonight, something caught fire right in the quiet heart of St. Mary Mead. Rain whispered against the windows of St. Mary Mead. A soft, steady rhythm, the kind that made people linger longer over tea. Inside the vicarage hall, the Women's Guild gathered around long wooden tables. Wool lay in baskets. Needles clicked like tiny clocks. The smell of damp coats mixed with lavender polish and sponge cake. Steam curled up from the teapot in lazy ribbons. Everything felt comfortingly ordinary. Mrs. Ellen Priest presided at the front, her spectacles sliding down her nose. "Ladies," she said, "the Harvest Bazaar must look splendid this year. Reverend Clement insists." Laughter rippled. Someone muttered about the weather ruining the bunting. Someone else offered to bake. Old arguments, kind ones, wrapped in warmth. Miss Marple sat near the end of the table, her knitting basket tucked neatly at her feet. Blue wool, tiny neat stitches. Her eyes wandered while her hands worked. She liked watching people more than patterns. You could read more truth in a twitch of the lip than in a row of lace. Lady Bantry leaned close. "Jane, do tell me, doesn't the rain make everything feel half asleep?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Or half awake, perhaps. People remember things when it rains." The door creaked open. Lily Veen entered, young and breathless, curls sticking to her forehead. "Sorry I'm late," she said. Her cheeks were flushed from the chill. She carried a small paper parcel, damp at the edges. No one asked what was in it. They assumed cakes. Everyone always assumed cakes. The talk drifted from the bazaar to lace patterns, from lace patterns to gossip. Mrs. Dodds claimed the postmistress was hoarding sugar again. Mabel Knox rolled her eyes. "Honestly, Ellen, you'd think the war never ended with the way people whisper about rations." Laughter again. Short. Nervous. Miss Marple didn't join in. Something faint touched her nose. Not tea. Not toast. A sweetness too sharp to belong in a vicarage hall, like sugar melting past its patience. She paused, knitting half done in her lap. The scent drifted again, light and stubborn. Burnt sugar, or something pretending to be. Mrs. Priest opened another tin of biscuits. No smoke, no scorch. Miss Marple tilted her head slightly, watching the corner near the tea table. Steam rose evenly from the pot. The stove ticked quietly, yet the smell deepened, richer, darker, too deliberate to be an accident. "Jane," Lady Bantry whispered, "is something wrong?" "Perhaps not," Miss Marple said softly. "Perhaps something is only out of place." A clock chimed 7. Conversation faded for a moment, as if the hall itself held its breath. Rain pressed harder against the panes, blurring the view outside into streaks of grey. Miss Marple resumed knitting. One row, then another. Her face calm, her eyes sharp. Somewhere behind the chatter and teacups, a small truth was stirring. Something warm, something dangerous. She didn't speak of it. Not yet. She simply made a mental note. Because in St. Mary Mead even a faint scent can lead to a fire, and tonight that scent was growing stronger. Mrs. Ellen Priest lifted the teapot with both hands. "Smells like bonfire night in here," she said, laughing. A few of the women chuckled. Someone mentioned toffee apples. Someone else said it was just the rain steaming on the stove. Miss Marple smiled politely, but her eyes moved to the source of the scent. She didn't trust jokes about smells. They often came before trouble. The stove glowed faintly against the far wall. The kettle purred, lid rattling just enough to sound alive. Nothing burning there, nothing wrong, and yet the sweetness in the air thickened. It clung to the throat, not the nose. Lady Bantry waved her hand in front of her face. "Good heavens, Ellen, have you spilled sugar again?" Ellen sniffed the air. "I swear it's the wind. Brings everything in through that old chimney." The others nodded, half listening, half gossiping. Comfort in noise, comfort in chatter. Miss Marple's knitting paused mid-stitch, her head tilted slightly. The smell was shifting. Not from the stove, not from the window. It moved. Sideways. Carried by warmth, not breeze. She glanced at the table nearest the tea urn. Steam curled from the spout, white and gentle. Nothing alarming. Yet under the hiss of the kettle, she heard something faint. A tiny pop. Then a soft hiss, too controlled to be random. "Ellen," Miss Marple said mildly, "did you rinse that teapot properly?" "Of course I did," Ellen replied, affronted. "It's been in the guild cupboard since Easter." "Ah," said Miss Marple, and said nothing more. Rain slid down the window in thin lines. The hall lights flickered once. Mrs. Dodds muttered something about the wiring. Mabel Knox went on counting raffle coins, tapping each on the table as if marking time. Lily Veen stirred her tea and didn't drink it. The spoon trembled against the cup. Miss Marple noticed it. So did Lady Bantry. But Lady Bantry saw nerves. Miss Marple saw thought. Different things entirely. Ellen Priest poured another round of tea. The pot gave a faint squeak as she tipped it. "Stiff handle," she said cheerfully. But Miss Marple heard the sound beneath the words, a soft crackle like sap catching flame. The sweet scent thickened, now unmistakable. Caramel gone too far. Sugar past mercy. Her nostrils prickled. The others didn't. Notice. They never did until too late. Miss Marple's gaze drifted again to the table. The teapot gleamed under the gaslight. Its silver edge too bright, too clean. Someone had polished it recently. She remembered Ellen's words. Since Easter. That pot should have looked dull. Not like that. She reached for her knitting again, letting the click of the needles blend with the hum of talk. Ellen poured another cup. Steam rose in delicate curls. The smell grew stronger, thick enough to taste. Miss Marple looked once more at the pot. Not the stove, not the window, not the hall. The pot. Her eyes narrowed, and quietly, without breaking her rhythm, she made her decision. The scent was moving, not from the kitchen, but from the teapot. The rain softened outside, turning from a steady pour to a whisper. Inside, conversation thickened like cream. Warm voices, soft laughter, and under it, the first threads of gossip. Lady Bantry leaned closer to Mrs. Dodds. She always did when the talk grew interesting. "I heard," she said in that careful, generous tone that always meant trouble, "that the new choir treasurer, Mr. Clive Perkins, has rather a loose hand with the collection tin." Mrs. Dodds clucked her tongue. "Loose? Oh, I'd say nimble. My Alfie saw him count the notes twice at practice, then pocket one for safekeeping." She looked smug, as if she had witnessed the theft herself. Young Lily Veen, sitting near the end of the table, shifted in her seat. Her teacup trembled slightly in her fingers. "That's not true," she said quickly. "Mr. Perkins is very honest. I've done the accounts with him myself." The room quieted, just a little. Mrs. Dodds raised her eyebrows. "Oh? Then perhaps you can explain why the guild books were short £2 last month." Her voice carried the same sweetness as the biscuits pleasant, but with a bite. Lily flushed. "I don't handle the cash," she murmured. "Only the arithmetic." Mabel Knox snorted, clicking her pen shut. "Then maybe it's your arithmetic that's the problem." Her words were sharp. Too sharp for tea hour. Lady Bantry smiled into her cup, pretending to scold. Now, we mustn't start a scandal over pennies. Though," she added lightly, "a little light shed on the choir accounts might not hurt. The laughter that followed was polite, forced. Eyes glanced sideways, one at Lily, one at Mabel, and back again. Miss Marple didn't join in. Her hands moved steadily, knitting a row of soft blue yarn. Her eyes flickered between the women. 3 ages of gossip, she thought, the whisperer, the accuser, and the defender. Only one of them trembled. She watched Lily carefully. The girl's hand shook again as she lifted her teacup. Not much, but enough to rattle the spoon. Nervous, yes. But not just from embarrassment. Something deeper, something heavier than rumor. Poor dear. Lady Bantry whispered to Miss Marple. "She's so sensitive, not built for village talk." Miss Marple nodded softly. "Or perhaps built for something more serious." "Whatever do you mean?" "Oh, nothing," Miss Marple said lightly. "Only that nerves and numbers rarely sit well together." Ellen Priest changed the subject loudly about raffle prizes and jam jars. Everyone exhaled. The warmth returned briefly, but Miss Marple's mind stayed with Lily's trembling hand, with Mabel's sharp tone, with the odd protectiveness that clung to Lady Bantry's gossip. The small village web was tightening again, one polite word at a time. The clock ticked. The rain picked up. The sweet burnt scent still lingered faintly, wrapping itself between the chatter. Miss Marple looked at Lily once more. The girl avoided her eyes. A stitch slipped from Marple's needle. She caught it deftly. Not every slip, she thought, is an accident. And not every tremble comes from fear. The knitting continued. The talk went on. But the air had changed soft on the surface, taut underneath. Something between those women. Something small. Something waiting to break. "Now then," said Mrs. Ellen Priest, clapping her hands for attention. "Before we pack up, we've still the matter of the lucky teapot drawer." The women brightened. A tradition. Predictable. Comforting. Each year, the guild raised money for the Christmas hampers. And each year, the raffle involved teapots, dozens of them old, chipped, or sentimental. Each woman contributed one. Each pot held a folded ticket, each ticket a number. Lady Bantry beamed. "Oh, what fun, my grandmother's pot again. It's hideous, but it brings luck." Mrs. Dodds chuckled. "Luck or dust." Clive Perkins appeared then, carrying a stack of envelopes. He had the air of a man who enjoyed holding something that others wanted. "Prize certificates," he announced. "All sealed and numbered by yours truly." His tone was cheerful, but Miss Marple caught the small flash of pride. He liked control. He always had. He set the envelopes beside the teapots. 8 in total. "Now," he said, "we'll draw them fairly. 1 pot per lady. Ellen, you'll keep the master list, of course." Ellen nodded, taking the ledger. Her pen hovered above the page. "All very proper," she said. "Yes," Clive replied, "all very proper." But he didn't let anyone touch the envelopes. Not yet. Miss Marple watched him with mild interest. Her knitting lay forgotten. She noted how carefully he positioned himself between the table and the group. Body turned just enough to hide his hands. A habit born of habit, not accident. Mabel Knox sighed impatiently. "If we're done with all this fuss, can we draw before the tea goes cold?" "Of course," said Clive, smiling. He lifted the first teapot. "Who's feeling lucky?" Steam rose from the spout in a long, curling ribbon. Miss Marple stepped forward. "Allow me, Mr. Perkins," she said gently. Old hands pour steadier than new. A few laughed. He handed her the teapot. The metal was warm beneath her fingers. Too warm in some places, too cool in others. Uneven. Strange. She tipped it carefully, refilling cups one by one. Steam fogged her glasses. She wiped them with a small handkerchief and peered again. The spout hissed faintly, not from the boil, something tighter, higher, like air escaping through a thin crack. "Ellen," she said lightly, "you didn't notice this pot whistling before, did you?" Ellen blinked. "No, Jane, it's never done that." Miss Marple poured the next cup. The sound came again, soft, persistent. Not the kettle, the pot itself. Inside it, the liquid shifted strangely, like water fighting against something thicker. Lady Bantry laughed. "Sounds haunted. Shall I fetch the vicar?" "No need," Miss Marple murmured. Her eyes narrowed just a touch. She held the pot near her ear, listening. The hiss grew sharper. Not steam. Not air. Something else. Clive Perkins moved closer. "Careful, Miss Marple. That's a delicate piece." "Indeed," she said. "So delicate it seems to breathe." The women laughed again, but uneasily. Clive reached for the envelopes. His hand hovered over them like a man protecting treasure. Miss Marple watched quietly. No one noticed the fine scent that rose again with the steam sweet and wrong. She poured the final cup, placed the teapot back on the tray, and stepped aside. Steam drifted lazily around her like mist. Her glasses clouded again, blurring the room into vague shapes and voices. She didn't wipe them this time. She only listened. To the hiss, to the laughter, to the faint pulse in the air. Something sharper than tea was moving through that hall, and it had just begun to breathe. Teacups lifted in a small chorus of cheer. The lucky teapot drawer had begun. Mrs. Ellen Preece clapped her hands once. "To good fortune," she said. Laughter followed, polite and practiced. Rain beat softly at the windows. Clive Perkins stood near the centre table. He raised his cup high. To the guild and to honest accounts. A few women chuckled. Mabel Knox rolled her eyes. Lady Bantry dabbed her lips with a napkin, smiling politely. Miss Marple sat still, her hands folded in her lap. The tea shimmered golden brown in the cups. Steam curled like ribbons. The air was warm, calm, harmless. Or so it seemed. Clive took a sip. Small, careful, then another. He frowned. The laughter around him softened into a blur. He coughed once, then again, harder. Ellen Preece laughed uncertainly. "Too hot, Mr. Perkins?" He waved a hand weakly. "Odd taste," he managed. A pause followed. Then the sound came again, choking this time. Mabel Knox frowned. "Really, Clive, it's only tea." Her words cut off when his cup slipped from his hand. Porcelain shattered. Tea spread across the table like a slow stain. His fingers twitched, then went still. The laughter stopped. The only sound was the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Lily Veen gasped, rising so quickly her chair tipped backward. "Someone help him!" Dr. Haydock, seated by the door, rushed forward. He knelt beside the fallen man, pressing 2 fingers against his neck. No response. Mrs. Dodds covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Lady Bantry whispered, "Oh, heavens!" Miss Marple rose quietly, steady as ever. Her eyes went first to the body, then to the teacup, then to the pot. Steam still drifted from the spout. The handle glistened with moisture. A small drop slid down the side, leaving a faint white trail. Miss Marple watched it with interest, not horror. Her mind was already working. Dr. Haydock shook his head. "It's over," he said softly. "Heart?" asked Ellen. "No," said Miss Marple. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Something sharper." Ellen looked at her, confused. "Sharper?" "Than tea," said Miss Marple. She stepped closer to the table. The air above the teapot shimmered slightly in the gaslight. A thin ribbon of steam curled upward, pale and perfect. Yet beneath it was another smell, bitter, sweet, the scent that had followed them all evening. Lady Bantry covered her nose. "What on earth?" "Almond," said Miss Marple softly. Her tone left no doubt. Everyone froze. No one spoke. Clive Perkins lay motionless on the floor, his face turned toward the ceiling. The hall felt smaller, the air thicker, even the rain seemed to hold back its rhythm. Miss Marple folded her hands neatly once more. No panic, no surprise, only quiet observation. The teapot still hissed faintly on the tray. A soft, sharp whisper, like a fuse that hadn't quite finished burning. Steam curled over the tablecloth. It spread slowly, winding between the cups and crumbs. A single drop of tea trembled on the edge of the broken saucer, then fell. No one breathed. The fire had found its spark, and in that silence, the village of St. Mary Mead realized the game had just turned deadly. Rain poured harder. The windows shivered under it. The smell of scorched sugar still hung in the air. The women sat frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. Then footsteps, heavy, purposeful. A sharp voice at the door. "Inspector Slack," someone whispered. The name itself straightened spines. He stepped inside, raincoat dripping, cap tilted low. His eyes swept the room. The body, the table, the teapot. "All right," he said briskly. "Lock the doors. No one leaves." Arthur, the caretaker, turned the key with a nervous clink. It sounded final, like a lid closing on a box. Slack took a slow look around. "Which of you poured the tea?" Ellen Preece stammered. Well, Miss Marple helped. Miss Marple looked up calmly. I poured, Inspector, but only under instruction. Slack's eyes narrowed. Whose instruction? Mr. Perkins's, she said. He nodded once. He bent down by the body. Dr. Haydock stood beside him, arms folded. Poison, the doctor murmured. Slack grimaced. So it looks. He turned to the women, faces pale, hands clenched around handkerchiefs. Listen to me carefully. No one touches anything. No one goes home. A murmur of shock rippled through the hall. Mrs. Dodds started to cry. Lady Bantry patted her shoulder. Ellen wrung her hands. Slack's tone hardened. I'll have the truth, and I'll have it now. Who handled that teapot before the drawer? Silence. Then Lily Veen spoke quietly. I fetched it from the cupboard. Her voice wavered. Ellen told me which one to use. Ellen's head snapped up. Yes, but I didn't touch it after. I swear I didn't. Someone did, said Slack. His gaze moved from face to face. The poison didn't pour itself. Miss Marple said nothing. Her eyes followed small details instead of words, a cup still half full, a teaspoon lying too far from its saucer, and two hands Lily's pale, trembling, Mabel Knox's red, raw, the skin faintly shiny around the fingertips. She filed it away. That kind of red didn't come from cold, it came from heat, from friction, from scrubbing. Slack barked a question. Who polished the silver tonight? No answer. He repeated it louder. Mabel coughed softly. Just wiped them. They looked dull, that's all. Slack frowned. With what? A cloth. Bit of cleaner. Her tone too quick, too tidy. Miss Marple watched quietly. Ellen shifted in her chair. Lily pressed her hands together. Outside, thunder rolled over the village. Inside, silence cracked with it. Slack began writing notes. I'll need every one of your statements. He gestured to the constable at the door. Collect the cups. Bag that teapot. Miss Marple glanced toward the table again. Steam no longer rose, but the scent lingered. Sweet, deadly, a memory in the air. She folded her hands neatly in her lap, her expression calm, but her mind alive. Lily's shaking, Mabel's reddened fingers, the hiss she'd heard earlier. Her lips curved slightly. The fire, she thought, was not in the kettle at all, and somewhere in that hall the match that lit it was still warm. Inspector Slack bent over the table. The hall was silent, but for the soft drip of rain against the window panes. The teapot sat in the center, innocent and shining. Steam no longer rose from it. Only the faint smell of almonds floated in the air. Slack reached out carefully. Right, he muttered. Let's see what devil's work hides in you. He lifted the pot by the handle. It didn't burn his hand. In fact, it didn't feel warm at all. He frowned. That's odd. Dr. Haydock leaned forward. Still half full? Yes, said Slack. But cold. Shouldn't be cold this soon. He tilted the pot over a clean saucer. A sluggish, sticky residue oozed out. Dark at the edges. Slick. Not tea. Not anything that belonged in a teacup. Slack wrinkled his nose. Smell that? The doctor nodded grimly. Almonds. A few of the women gasped. Ellen Preece pressed a hand to her chest. I swear I washed that pot myself. Slack didn't answer. He turned the teapot in his hands, examining the handle, the spout, the lid. The metal caught the light strangely, shiny in patches, dull in others. He set it down, looked puzzled, then looked up at Miss Marple. Didn't you say you poured from this yourself? I did, she said quietly. Was it warm? Yes, Inspector. Warm, but unevenly so. Her voice carried that mild certainty that made Slack's jaw tighten. He didn't like being led, even when he needed it. She leaned slightly forward, eyes on the pot. Curious, she murmured almost to herself. Metal should stay warm, especially thick metal. Slack grunted. Maybe the room cooled it quick. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Or maybe something changed its heat. He paused. What's that supposed to mean? Simply that heat travels through metal, unless something interferes. Her gaze stayed on the teapot handle. There was a faint whitish smear along its edge. She pointed with a gloved finger. There, near the hinge. Slack leaned closer. Cleaner? Possibly, said Miss Marple. Or perhaps residue from a chemical. Something oily, perhaps to coat it. The women at the table shifted uneasily. Ellen whispered, I told you I used polish last Easter. Easter, repeated Miss Marple softly. She tilted her head. That's quite a long time ago for such a fresh shine. Slack tapped his pencil against his notebook. Could be polish, could be poison. We'll test it. He gestured for the constable to bag the teapot. Miss Marple kept watching, expression unreadable. Her thoughts moved quietly beneath her calm surface. A cold handle, a sticky residue, and a smell that shouldn't be in any vicarage hall. Lady Bantry whispered, Do you think someone— Miss Marple hushed her gently. One never thinks too soon, my dear. Slack turned away, barking orders for samples and gloves. The women whispered among themselves again, frightened now. Miss Marple stayed seated, her fingers folded neatly, her eyes following the teapot as it disappeared into the inspector's evidence bag. The sound of the clasp clicking shut seemed loud in the quiet hall, like the lid of a secret closing itself. Outside, thunder rolled softly across St. Mary Mead, and Miss Marple's eyes glinted behind her spectacles. Unless, she whispered, something or someone changed its heat. Inspector Slack's voice filled the vicarage hall. Calm, firm, final. Right, we'll do this properly, one at a time. The women sat in 2 rows of chairs, hands clasped, eyes down. The air still smelled faintly of tea and almonds. Miss Marple remained at the back, quiet, knitting in her lap. Her needles moved slowly, each click a thought. Slack started with Mrs. Ellen Preece. You bake the cakes? Yes, Inspector. Lemon sponge and a seed loaf. You prepared the tea? No, only fetched the cups. He nodded. Did you touch the teapot before the drawer? Her eyes widened. Certainly not. I gave it to Lily to rinse. He turned to Lily Veen. You fetched the water? Yes, from the pump behind the hall. Was anyone with you? She shook her head. No, sir. It was raining. Everyone stayed inside. Her fingers twisted the hem of her sleeve. Slack noticed. So did Miss Marple. Mabel Knox? Slack said next. Mabel sat upright, shoulders squared. I arranged the sugar bowls, she said crisply, and handled the cutlery. Slack tilted his head. With bare hands? Well, of course, Inspector. I wasn't expecting murder in a teapot. A few nervous laughs, quickly silenced by his glare. Lady Bantry was next. Elegant, calm, too practiced for panic. I only arranged the raffle slips, she said. Mr. Perkins gave them to me. I shuffled them before the drawer. Slack nodded slowly. And did you see him seal the envelopes? She blinked. I assumed he had. They were already in his jacket pocket. Slack's pencil stopped moving. He looked up. So, none of you saw him seal them? No answer, only the tick of the clock. The room's silence grew heavy again. Miss Marple lowered her knitting. Her voice was gentle. Inspector, perhaps everyone might recall if Mr. Perkins had his envelopes with him when he arrived. Details like that fade quickly. Slack frowned but said nothing. The women exchanged uncertain glances. Ellen hesitated first. I think, yes, he had them when he came in. Lily shook her head. No, he went to the vestry cupboard before he joined us. That's right, Mabel added. He said he'd forgotten something in there. Slack wrote something down. Marple's eyes drifted to Lily again. The girl's complexion had gone white as starch. Her hands trembled when she reached for her teacup. The cup was empty, but she held it like a shield. Mabel sat beside her, rubbing her red fingers with a handkerchief. Polish residue still faintly glistened under her nails. Small things. Miss Marple noticed them all. The questioning continued, but the rhythm changed. Voices grew shorter. Answers clipped. The walls of the hall seemed to tighten. Each woman spoke, but none of them truly listened. And in every story, one small fact stayed the same, the envelopes. Everyone remembered Clive Perkins carrying them, but no one saw him seal them. Miss Marple set down her knitting, eyes bright. Sometimes the most dangerous secret isn't poured into a cup. It's folded quietly into an envelope. Dr. Haydock stood near the window, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Outside, rain traced slow lines down the glass. Inside, the hall smelled of polish, tea, and something faintly metallic. He held a small glass vial up to the light. Within it swirled a few drops of cloudy liquid. The residue taken from the teapot. He frowned, sniffed, stepped back quickly. "Well," he said grimly, "that confirms it." Inspector Slack straightened. "Go on, then." "Hydrogen cyanide," said Dr. Haydock. Fast, efficient, unmistakable. A shiver rippled through the room. Mrs. Dodds gasped softly. Ellen Preece whispered, "Dear Lord." Lady Bantry turned away, hand pressed to her chest. Miss Marple didn't move. She only repeated the words quietly. "Bitter almonds again." Her tone was calm, almost reflective. Slack exhaled through his nose. "Cyanide? Then it was in the tea." He looked around sharply. "But everyone drank from that pot. If it was poisoned, you'd all be on the floor." Haydock shook his head. "No trace in the cups." "None?" "None," the doctor confirmed. "The poison was isolated, controlled, not mixed." Slack frowned. "Then how the devil—" Miss Marple spoke softly. "Perhaps it wasn't in the tea, Inspector." He turned toward her. Her voice, though gentle, cut through the noise. "It may have been on what poured it." Slack blinked. "Come again?" "The spout," she said. "Or the rim, somewhere the liquid passed." The doctor glanced at her, intrigued. "Contact poisoning?" "Possibly," she said. "Or brushed residue. Cyanide can act through vapor, can it not?" "Under heat," said Haydock. "Yes, just so," Miss Marple replied. Slack rubbed his forehead. "So someone painted poison where he'd touch or drink." "More likely," Miss Marple murmured, "where he'd pour." He stared at the teapot on the evidence table. The polished silver gleamed dully under the gaslight. The spout was narrow, thin. A small smear still clung near its edge, faintly white. Slack leaned closer. "That mark again." "Indeed," said Miss Marple. "The residue was placed carefully, not spilled, and perhaps coated with something oily to keep it from washing away." Ellen Preece shook her head. "Who would even think of such a thing?" "Someone," said Miss Marple, "who wanted him to pour his own cup." Silence spread again. Only the rain filled it. Steady, cold, unfeeling. Slack paced once. So this wasn't about chance. It was planned. Miss Marple folded her hands. "Nothing involving teapots and village committees ever happens by chance, Inspector." He stared at her. Her expression gave nothing away, only the faintest gleam of thought behind her spectacles. She nodded toward the teapot. "Watch the spout, Inspector. Sometimes the deadliest secrets don't hide in what's brewed." Slack followed her gaze. The spout caught the light again, thin, bright, and waiting. A quiet trap in plain sight. And as the clock struck 8, he realized something simple and terrible. The killer hadn't poisoned what Clive Perkins drank. They had poisoned the very thing that let him drink it. Arthur the caretaker shuffled in from the corridor, cap in hand, shoes leaving small prints of rain. Inspector Slack motioned to him. "Arthur, fetch another teapot from the kitchen, will you? The same kind." Arthur nodded, vanished through the swinging door. Silence settled again. Miss Marple sat still, eyes half closed as though listening to something the others could not hear. Moments later, the door creaked open. Arthur returned, carrying a second pot wrapped in a towel. He set it on the table beside the first. 2 twins in the lamplight. Slack leaned over them. "Identical." Arthur scratched his chin. "Not quite, sir. Look at the bottom." He turned one over, careful not to spill the damp towel. Stamped into the base, neat as a coin, were 2 tiny words: St. Mary Mead Church. The other bore a faint mark LV. "Church property," said Slack. "And this one, Lily Veen." The young woman flinched at the sound of her name. "Yes," she said faintly. "My mother's. I brought it for the drawer." Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles. 2 teapots, she murmured. Same pattern, same size, different souls. Slack frowned. Souls? Every household object has a memory, Inspector. One keeps charity tea, the other keeps intention. He ignored the philosophy. Which was used tonight? Arthur hesitated. The one with the church mark, I think. Or, well, perhaps the other. They were side by side on the shelf. Marple rose. Her fingers brushed the nearer pot. Moisture beaded across its surface, glistening under the light. She took her handkerchief and wiped a slow circle near the spout. A faint dust clung to the cloth, white, grainy, stubborn. Slack watched. What's that? She held it up. Not polish. Too fine. And only here, at the seam where the spout joins the body. She looked up, calm as ever. Where the paw begins. Dr. Haydock bent closer, sniffed cautiously. Chemical. Marple nodded. Exactly. A clever mind placed it where heat would awaken it. Ellen Preece whispered, Good heavens, both pots the same, and one switched. Perhaps, said Marple, or perhaps someone polished the wrong one deliberately right. Slack's pencil hovered. So, 2 pots in play. Yes, she said softly. One belonged to charity, the other calculation. He straightened, uneasy. This isn't about luck, then. Marple's eyes lingered on the white residue, then on Lily Veen's pale face. Luck rarely smells of almonds, Inspector. Arthur swallowed hard. Which do we keep, ma'am? Marple looked from one pot to the other, identical, yet not. She gave a small sigh. Both, Arthur, until we know which hand switched kindness for cruelty. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the churchyard. Inside, the lamps flickered. 2 teapots sat side by side, one clean, one cursed. And in the quiet that followed, everyone wondered which was which. Inspector Slack resumed questioning with renewed impatience. The lamps hummed. The rain drummed on, and the smell of polish still clung to the air like guilt. He pointed his pencil toward the 2 identical teapots on the table. Right. I want it clear this time. Who touched which? Mabel Knox was first. She crossed her arms, chin high. I only swapped them, she said, for a prettier one. The church pot looked dull. Slack's eyebrows lifted. You swapped them? It was harmless. Just thought the raffle would look nicer, with the polished one. Polished when? This afternoon. Polished with what? Mabel hesitated. A bit of silver cleaner, ordinary kind. Slack leaned forward. Did you rinse it after? Her lips thinned. I wiped it down. Miss Marple's eyes rested on Mabel's hands, red, raw, rubbed too clean. Polish didn't burn skin that way unless scrubbed in a hurry. She noted it silently. Slack turned to Lily Veen. You fetched the water. Did you handle either pot afterward? Lily shook her head quickly. No, Inspector. I never touched the spouts. Sure? Yes. I poured the water into the kettle, not the pots. Her voice trembled. She looked small beside the others, her fingers gripping her sleeve like a lifeline. Ellen Preece spoke up, her voice shaking. Mr. Perkins checked the raffle slips again by the stove. I saw him. Slack turned to her. When? Just before we started pouring tea. He took the envelopes out? Yes. He said he wanted to make sure the numbering matched the list. Slack scribbled fast. Anyone else near him? No one. Everyone was setting up. Miss Marple's gaze moved to Ellen as she spoke. Her hands twisted her new wedding ring. A simple band, dull silver, yet shining oddly in the warm lamplight. Too bright for tarnished metal. Too bright for age. Dr. Haydock noticed too. He tilted his head slightly, saying nothing. Miss Marple met his eyes. A single glance passed between them. A silent exchange of logic. She knew what he saw, the faint powder along the ring's edge, caught in the grooves of the engraving. Same powder as the spout. Same telltale brightness. Slack looked up, frustrated. So, we've got switches, wipes, and swaps. Everyone innocent, and a man dead. He slammed his notebook shut. Miss Marple's tone remained calm. Patience, Inspector. Even teapots keep secrets until they cool. He grunted, pacing. Women avoided each other's eyes. Only Ellen's hand still turned that ring, over and over, like worry given shape. Miss Marple folded her knitting, the motion deliberate. Her thoughts came together, quiet and certain. The residue, the switch, the ring, the fire, she thought, had never been in the kettle. It had been carried by hand. Her eyes drifted once more to Ellen's fingers. The dull silver caught the lamplight again, bright as gilt, and Miss Marple, smiling faintly, knew the teapot wasn't the only thing polished too soon. The storm had quieted. Only the drip of rain from the eaves filled the silence now. Inspector Slack stood near the vestry table, sorting through Clive Perkins's overcoat. Pockets turned out. Coins, a handkerchief, and one folded piece of paper. He opened it carefully. Typed words stared back in clean black ink. No greeting, no signature, just a single line. Confession money returned tonight. Slack frowned. Found this in his pocket, he said. Miss Marple looked up from her knitting. Typed, not written, she murmured. He nodded. Machine work all right. The vicar's got one in his office. Same kind I used in the war. Dr. Haydock leaned closer. No date. No initials? None, said Slack. He held the page near the light. The letter E's faint, like the hammer's worn out. Miss Marple's needle stopped mid-click. Her eyes sharpened. The vicar's machine has that same flaw, she said softly. I remember it from the parish notices. His E always limps. Slack looked over. You're certain? Oh, yes, she said. I proofread the harvest leaflet last week. Same uneven E. Exactly the same. He rubbed his jaw. So the note came from the vicar's study. But who used the machine? Ellen Preece's voice trembled. Mrs. Dodds used it for the meeting minutes, Mabel Knox added quickly. And I borrowed it yesterday for the raffle tickets. She shifted in her chair, eyes darting to the two teapots still on the table. Mr. Perkins asked me to type something for him, just a heading. Nothing more. Slack's eyes narrowed. What heading? Mabel hesitated. Something about the draw list. Her voice thinned. I didn't look closely. Miss Marple resumed knitting. Her needles moved faster now, a rhythm with thought behind it. Click. Pause. Click. Her eyes remained on the note. She rose, stepping toward the table. Inspector, may I? He handed her the page. She smoothed it gently, like a nurse tending linen. Her gaze traced each word again. Confession, money returned tonight. She folded the sheet neatly. Her fingers brushed the edge. The paper had faint smudges, dark near the top margin finger marks, slightly oily. Someone had handled it nervously. She looked at Mabel. Yesterday, you say? Yes, Mabel whispered. Late afternoon. And you were alone? Aye, yes. Miss Marple smiled kindly. That's quite a lot of yes for one memory. Slack sighed. I'll have the machine dusted. He took the paper, slipped it into an envelope, and sealed it. The sound of the glue flap closing echoed louder than expected. Miss Marple sat again. Her knitting resumed, steady and quick. The room watched her as though the sound itself could solve the case. Each click of the needles marked a thought. Confession, money, return. Typed not written, a lie disguised as repentance. And somewhere in that hall sat the hand that had pressed the weak letter E. Miss Marple didn't look up, but her needles clicked faster, sharper, each sound a step closer to truth. Because lies, she knew, always left fingerprints even on typewriters. The hall had grown still again. Night pressed against the windows like a secret trying to listen in. Only the lamps burned now, low, yellow, unsteady. Inspector Slack stood at the center, arms folded. The women sat in uneasy rows. Dr. Haydock waited near the evidence table. The two teapots glimmered faintly beneath the light. Miss Marple rose, quietly, deliberately. Her knitting rested on the chair behind her. Inspector, she began, voice soft but steady. I believe the matter is simpler than it seems. Slack glanced at her, half tired, half curious. Then, by all means, enlighten us. She stepped closer to the table, her eyes on the teapot. The poison was brushed on the spout, she said, just where he'd wipe his cup. No one spoke. She continued, calm and methodical. Mr. Perkins always poured first and neatly. He would touch the spout's edge with his napkin each time to keep the drip from spotting his sleeve. Her hand mimed the motion. Delicate, precise. He wiped, she said softly. And that was enough. Slack frowned. But the heat, wouldn't it burn the poison away? Not if it was protected. She looked up at Dr. Haydock. She greased it with paraffin, Inspector. That kept it from blistering under heat. The doctor nodded slowly. Yes, that would hold the compound stable. Clever. Miss Marple gave a small nod. She used silver polish afterward to hide the mark. That gave the handle its strange brightness and her fingers their redness. All eyes turned to Mabel Knox. She froze, lips parting in protest. I only wiped it, Miss Marple. Only wiped. Yes, said Marple softly, but you wiped the wrong one. Someone else prepared the right one. Her gaze shifted to the far end of the table. To Lily Veen. The girl's face had drained of colour. Her hands clutched her handkerchief too tightly. Miss Marple spoke almost kindly now. You knew cyanide, my dear. From cleaning laboratory glass at the school. You would know how to handle it safely, and how to make it vanish with water. Lily shook her head. No, that's not. But her voice faltered. The words tangled. Miss Marple's tone didn't change. Clive Perkins mocked you once, didn't he? About the accounts. About your sums. He took your father's money, I believe. Promised to return it. Her eyes softened. And he nearly did. Lily's hands trembled. Slack took one step forward. Dr. Haydock exhaled. No one moved. Miss Marple went on quietly. You left the note in his pocket. You meant to frighten him into confession, not kill him. But cyanide does not forgive mismeasurements. Lily's hand went to her mouth. A faint cry escaped, half breath, half guilt. The handkerchief dropped to the floor. The silence that followed was complete. Even the clock seemed to hesitate before ticking again. Miss Marple looked down at the fallen cloth, then back to the girl. So much calculation, she murmured, for so little peace. Her words hung in the air like smoke. And across the room, Lily Veen's trembling hands told the rest. Inspector Slack stepped forward. The floor creaked under his boots. He stopped in front of Lily Veen. She sat rigid in her chair, hands still trembling, eyes wide and bright with fear. Miss Veen, he said quietly, you heard Miss Marple. His voice was steady, but the weight behind it left no room to hide. Have you anything to say before I take you in? Lily opened her mouth. No sound came. Her throat worked once, twice. Then she shook her head slowly, eyes glistening. I didn't mean to kill him, she whispered. I swear I didn't. No one breathed. The lamps flickered against the walls. Rain drummed faintly above the roof. Slack's pencil froze halfway across his notebook. Then you admit it? Her voice cracked. I only wanted to frighten him, to make him pay back what he took. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Tears spilled over, soft and steady. He stole from my father's estate. It was only a few pounds, but it was all that was left after the funeral. And he laughed. Inspector, said a schoolteacher's daughter should learn arithmetic before speaking of accounts. Her shoulders shook. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her face remained calm. The others watched in stunned silence. Guilt, pity, relief tangled together. Lily continued, words tumbling faster now. I went to his house last week. I begged him to return it. He promised he would. Tonight. Said he'd bring a note of confession for the guild records to clear himself. She swallowed hard. I thought he'd never write it, so I typed one myself, just to remind him. Her hands twisted the handkerchief in her lap. I left it in his coat pocket before tea began. I thought he'd find it later and panic. I thought... She stopped. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't know he'd touched the wrong teapot. I didn't know it would... Her sentence broke into sobs. The sound filled the hall like wind through a crack in glass. Inspector Slack closed his notebook slowly. That'll do. He nodded once to the constable by the door. The young man stepped forward, hat in hand. Miss Marple rose. She looked at Lily not with judgment, but with weary compassion. Her voice came soft, low, certain. Intent burns quietly too, my dear, until it smokes. Lily lifted her eyes wet, red, lost. She didn't resist when the constable took her arm, only whispered, "I only wanted him to feel sorry." Miss Marple replied gently, "He did, I think. But remorse comes too late when poison waits in its cup." The constable led her toward the door. Ellen Preece began to cry. Lady Bantry turned away. Dr. Haydock sighed. Inspector Slack stared at the empty teapot as though it could still answer questions. The door closed with a soft click. The hall felt hollow without the girl's trembling breath. Miss Marple stood alone by the table. The rain had stopped. Outside, steam no longer rose from the cups. Only the faint smell of burnt sweetness lingered, the scent of something once innocent, turned bitter. And in that silence, the truth finally cooled. The next afternoon arrived calm and golden. St. Mary Mead had washed itself clean in the night's rain. Sunlight glowed through lace curtains, scattering soft shapes on the carpet. In Miss Marple's sitting room, the kettle whistled gently. The air smelled of tea leaves and quiet. Lady Bantry sat near the fire, her hat resting on her lap. She looked tired, though she smiled faintly. "I can't stop thinking about that poor girl," she said. "So clever, so foolish, such a dreadful waste." Miss Marple poured tea into 2 cups, steady and precise. The sound was soothing liquid meeting porcelain, time measured in small comforts. "Foolishness," she said softly, "is often only cleverness turned inward. It burns itself before lighting anyone else." Lady Bantry sighed. "She meant no harm, Jane." "Few ever do," Miss Marple replied. Her voice was calm, without edge. "She only wanted justice. But justice, my dear, must be brewed slowly, or it scalds the one who pours it." Outside, a sparrow fluttered against the window, then settled on the sill. The village beyond was peaceful. No sirens, no whispers, only the familiar rhythm of life resuming. Lady Bantry stirred her cup absently. "Inspector Slack said she'll likely get leniency. Manslaughter, not murder." Miss Marple nodded once. "Slack has more mercy than he admits. He only hides it behind his bark." They sat in companionable silence for a while. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner firm, patient, sure. Every few seconds, its pendulum caught the light like a heartbeat. Lady Bantry broke the quiet. "Do you ever tire of being right, Jane?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I tire of the reasons people give me for being so." The fire cracked. Steam drifted between them like thin mist. Lady Bantry's eyes softened. "She was so young," she murmured. "Yes," said Miss Marple. "Old enough to understand revenge. Too young to understand what it costs." Lady Bantry looked toward the mantel. "Do you think she regretted it?" "Oh, instantly," said Miss Marple. "The moment he fell, that's when the lesson began. Not before." The clock chimed once 3:30. Miss Marple refilled the cups. Her hands never trembled. Years of steadiness in tea and truth had trained them well. She looked out toward the garden, where sunlight lay over the dahlias like gold dust. The same garden where she had once noticed a single weed growing where it shouldn't. One small thing, out of place. And she smiled faintly. It was always the small things. Lady Bantry took a slow sip. "Strange, isn't it? How peace always feels a little guilty after chaos." Miss Marple looked up. "Peace, my dear, is just truth cooling down. It takes longer than tea." They sat quietly again. Steam curled upward, fading into light. The air held no bitterness now, only the slow, sweet calm that follows understanding. The clock ticked on. The truth, as always, had settled quietly, perfectly, and just in time. A soft knock came at the front door. Not hurried, measured, respectful. The sound of duty arriving with the morning post. Miss Marple looked up from her cup. Lady Bantry glanced toward the window. Outside, the postman stood beneath the garden arch, hat dripping from the lingering drizzle. A small envelope rested in his gloved hand. Now who could that be for? Lady Bantry murmured, The maid Alice fetched it in moments and returned, placing it gently on the table beside the sugar bowl. The envelope was cream-coloured, clean, and neatly addressed. To Miss Marple, private and urgent. No sender's name, only a red hotel seal pressed into the corner. Miss Marple tilted her head. Lady Bantry leaned closer. Private and urgent. You do attract the most interesting letters, Jane. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Mostly bills and appeals for the parish fair, but this— she turned it over, eyes bright behind her spectacles. Comes from Brighton. The return address read, Seabourn Hotel, Brighton. Lady Bantry's eyebrows lifted. How perfectly seaside. Someone must be having trouble with the tea there as well. Miss Marple chuckled softly. One can hope it's nothing more than that. She reached for her letter opener, careful and unhurried. The tiny blade slid under the flap with a whisper. She paused before breaking the seal, as though listening to the silence first. The clock ticked. The fire crackled. Outside, the postman's footsteps faded down the lane. Lady Bantry sipped her tea, watching. Well? Miss Marple didn't answer at once. She studied the writing again, her eyes narrowing slightly at the slant of the letters. Professional. Controlled. But one word, urgent, pressed too firmly. Someone nervous wrote this, she murmured. Not frightened, but pressed by time. Lady Bantry leaned back. You'll open it, of course. Of course. The paper tore softly. Inside lay one folded sheet, thick and stiff. Miss Marple lifted it, scanning the first line. Her expression changed just enough for Lady Bantry to notice. What is it? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. An invitation of sorts. To the coast. She set the letter down beside the sugar bowl. Her teacup sat untouched, steam curling faintly upward. Lady Bantry smiled. Then Brighton will never be the same. Miss Marple gave a small laugh. Nor, I suspect, will its guests. She rose slowly, the sunlight catching her silver hair. The lace curtains swayed with the breeze. Outside, a blackbird sang from the hedge, as if to punctuate the moment. Lady Bantry tilted her head. You're going, then? Oh, yes, said Miss Marple, softly but surely. One shouldn't ignore a mystery that travels by post. She poured the last of the tea into her cup, now gone tepid. Then she smiled that small, knowing smile. And so, she said, our tea grows cold again. The clock chimed 4. The letter lay open on the table, edges fluttering in the gentle draught. And somewhere beyond St. Mary Mead, the waves at Brighton rolled, waiting. And that, dear listeners, was tonight's mystery. What did you think? Where do you imagine the next one begins, perhaps by the seaside, with a letter and a kettle left on the stove? Tell me in the comments. I love reading your theories, and your guesses are often sharper than Miss Marple's own. If you enjoyed tonight's story, tap like, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe for tomorrow's tale. Until then, keep your tea warm, your heart curious, and remember, in every quiet room, some kettle still waits to boil.